You struggle with conflicting perceptions of the avoidant that make decisions about the relationship feel impossible. You recognize they are not malicious person intentionally causing you harm, not cruel individual who takes pleasure in your suffering, not manipulative abuser who consciously designs strategies to damage you. You see their good qualities, their genuine struggles, their real wounds that created their defended patterns. You understand their emotional unavailability stems from childhood experiences that taught them intimacy is dangerous. Their withdrawal reflects attachment trauma rather than reflecting deliberate cruelty. Their inability to meet your needs results from their defensive limitations rather than from their desire to deprive you. This recognition of their essential humanity, their genuine wounding, their lack of malicious intent creates compassion that makes leaving feel harsh or judgmental, makes establishing boundaries feel punitive, makes protecting yourself feel like abandoning someone who is struggling rather than like legitimate self-protection. Yet, this same person whose goodness you recognize, whose wounds you understand, whose lack of malicious intent you acknowledge is systematically ruining you through their patterns regardless of their intentions or their inherent goodness as person. The ruin manifests through your deteriorating mental health as the relationship generates constant anxiety about their availability and their feelings, through your eroding self-worth as their inability to demonstrate consistent care makes you question your value, through your lost sense of reality as their words contradict their actions in ways that make you doubt your own perceptions, through your abandoned, authentic self as you suppress your needs and modify your personality, attempting to become acceptable enough that they can sustain connection. You are being damaged in measurable ways. Your sleep suffers, your concentration deteriorates, your other relationships decline as you pour all energy into managing the avoidant relationship. Your professional performance drops as emotional turmoil consumes mental resources. Your physical health declines through stress that manifests in tangible symptoms. This damage is real and accumulating regardless of whether the person causing it is good person with valid wounds or bad person with malicious intentions. The critical recognition you must reach involves holding both truths simultaneously without allowing one truth to erase the other. The avoidant is not bad person whose essential nature is malicious or cruel, and the avoidance patterns are ruining you in ways that will cause lasting damage if you continue accepting those patterns regardless of the wounded goodness driving them. Their lack of bad intentions does not obligate you to accept the bad outcomes their patterns create. Their real trauma does not require you to sacrifice yourself attempting to accommodate limitations that harm you. Their essential goodness as person does not mean staying in relationship with them is good for you. You can acknowledge they are not bad person, while simultaneously acknowledging that relationship with them is bad for you, can recognize their wounds are valid, while recognizing those wounds generate patterns that wound you, can maintain compassion for their struggles, while refusing to continue being damaged by the behaviors those struggles produce. The path forward requires releasing the false belief that leaving or protecting yourself from someone requires them to be bad person. You can leave good person whose patterns harm you, can establish boundaries with wounded person whose limitations damage you, can choose yourself over someone who means well but whose well-meaning does not prevent the systematic ruin their defended patterns create in your life and your well-being. Their wounds are real, but their impact on you is equally real. The avoidance defended patterns stem from legitimate childhood experiences that created their attachment wounds. They experienced caregiver who was inconsistent or emotionally unavailable or intrusive in ways that taught them intimacy is threatening. They learned through repeated experience that expressing needs leads to disappointment or rejection or punishment. They developed a defensive structure as necessary adaptation to environment that did not provide safe, consistent attachment. These origins are real and valid. The avoidant is not choosing their patterns from menu of relationship strategies. They are operating from wounded defensive structure that developed a survival mechanism during vulnerable developmental period when they lacked capacity to protect themselves through other means. Understanding this origin generates appropriate compassion for their struggle and recognition that they are doing their best within limitations created by experiences beyond their control during formative years. Yet the validity of their wounds and the understandable origins of their patterns do not erase or minimize the very real impact those patterns have on you. Their withdrawal, regardless of whether it stems from attachment trauma, creates genuine anxiety and pain for you as you experience repeated cycles of connection followed by abandonment that activate your own attachment system and generate legitimate suffering. Their emotional unavailability, regardless of whether it developed as defense against childhood emotional intrusion, leaves your intimacy needs chronically unmet in ways that create loneliness and frustration and grief about living with a partner who cannot provide emotional connection you legitimately need. Their inability to commit or prioritize you adequately, regardless of whether it reflects their defended need for autonomy developed through childhood enmeshment, creates insecurity and diminished self-worth as you face ongoing evidence that you do not matter enough to merit their full investment. The impact on you operates independently of the origins of their behavior. You experience the same anxiety whether their withdrawal stems from attachment trauma or from deliberate cruelty. You suffer the same loneliness whether their emotional unavailability results from defensive limitation or from intentional withholding. You develop the same insecurity whether their inability to prioritize you reflects their wounds or reflects their assessment that you are not valuable enough to prioritize. The suffering their patterns create in you is not lessened by understanding why those patterns exist. Understanding may generate compassion, but it does not reduce the tangible harm you experience as consequence of those patterns operating in your relationship. The reality of your suffering also includes specific measurable impacts that accumulate regardless of their intentions. Your mental health deteriorates through constant anxiety about relationship status, through rumination about what you did wrong to trigger their latest withdrawal, through hypervigilance, attempting to monitor their emotional state to predict their next retreat. Your self-worth erodes as their inability to demonstrate consistent care generates belief that you are not lovable enough, not valuable enough, not acceptable enough to merit reliable presence. Your other relationships suffer as you pour disproportionate energy into managing the avoidant relationship, as you cancel plans with friends when the avoidant sporadically becomes available, as you discuss your relationship struggles so extensively that friends become exhausted with supporting you through repetitive cycles. Your professional performance declines as emotional turmoil from relationship consumes cognitive resources you need for work, as stress manifests in decreased concentration and productivity. The impact extends to your physical health through stress responses that manifest in tangible symptoms. You develop sleep disturbances as anxiety about relationship prevents rest. You experience digestive issues as chronic stress affects your gut. You suffer headaches or muscle tension as your body holds the emotional strain the relationship creates. You may develop or exacerbate chronic health conditions as sustained stress compromises your immune function and your overall physical well-being. These physical manifestations of relationship stress are real health impacts that occur regardless of whether the person creating the stress has valid wounds or malicious intentions. The false dichotomy you must reject is the belief that acknowledging validity of their wounds requires minimizing reality of their impact on you. Both truths coexist. Their wounds are real and their impact on you is real. Their defensive patterns developed from legitimate trauma, and those patterns cause you legitimate harm. They are doing their best from within their limitations, and their best is inadequate to prevent damaging you. Holding both truths simultaneously allows you to maintain compassion for their struggle, while maintaining clear perception of how that struggle manifests in behaviors that harm you. You can understand why they withdraw while recognizing their withdrawal damages you, can comprehend the origins of their emotional unavailability. While acknowledging that unavailability leaves you lonely and unfulfilled, can have empathy for their defended limitations while refusing to continue accepting the impact those limitations have on your well-being. Understanding that their wounds are real, but their impact is equally real, allows you to make decisions based on the reality of what relationship does to you rather than based on theoretical compassion for why they behave as they do. The question is not whether their patterns stem from valid wounds. The question is whether you will continue accepting the damage those patterns cause regardless of their origins. Compassion for their wounds does not obligate you to sacrifice your well-being to accommodate those wounds. Understanding their trauma does not require you to continue being traumatized by the behaviors their trauma produces. You can acknowledge their essential goodness and their valid struggles, while simultaneously acknowledging that relationship with them is destroying you, in ways that will create lasting damage if you do not remove yourself from exposure to patterns that harm you, regardless of the wounded goodness motivating those patterns. Good intentions cannot protect you from the damage their limitations create. The avoidant genuinely cares about you within their limited capacity, genuinely does not want to hurt you, genuinely wishes they could provide what you need, genuinely struggles with their inability to show up adequately in relationship. Their intentions are not malicious. They do not withdraw because they enjoy causing you pain. They withdraw because intimacy exceeds their defended tolerance. They do not remain emotionally unavailable because they want to deprive you. They remain unavailable because vulnerability feels threatening to their defensive structure. They do not fail to prioritize you because they want to communicate you are unimportant. They fail to prioritize because commitment activates their engulfment fears. These good intentions are real. The avoidant is not villain who takes pleasure in your suffering. They are a wounded person whose defensive limitations prevent them from providing what relationship requires, despite genuinely wishing they could provide it. Yet their good intentions provide zero protection from the systematic damage their limitations create in your life and your well-being. You develop the same anxiety disorder whether they withdraw with good intentions or with malicious intent. You experience the same erosion of self-worth whether their emotional unavailability stems from caring limitation or from deliberate cruelty. You suffer the same deterioration of mental health whether their failure to prioritize you reflects their wounds or reflects their assessment that you deserve deprioritization. The damage occurs through the patterns themselves regardless of the intentions or the internal struggles driving those patterns. The good intentions also cannot prevent specific destructive dynamics that their limitations create in the relationship. Their inability to provide consistent presence creates anxious attachment in you even if you enter relationship with secure attachment. The repeated cycles of connection and withdrawal condition your nervous system to remain hypervigilant about their availability, to become activated by any sign of distance, to organize your behavior around preventing their next retreat. This anxious adaptation serves you poorly, even if relationship ends, leaving you with attachment wounds that affect future relationships and require significant work to heal. Their limitation created lasting change in your attachment patterns that will affect you long after relationship concludes, regardless of their good intentions while creating those patterns. Their emotional unavailability forces you into a position of suppressing your own needs and emotional expression to avoid overwhelming them. You learn to minimize your feelings, to regulate your emotional expression, to avoid sharing struggles that might burden them, to present sanitized version of yourself that fits within their limited capacity. This suppression becomes a habitual pattern that disconnects you from your authentic self, that trains you to prioritize others' comfort over your own emotional reality, that creates lasting damage to your capacity for genuine self-expression and authentic relating. Their limitation transformed you into a person who suppresses and performs, rather than a person who expresses and exists authentically. This transformation damages you regardless of their good intentions, while requiring your suppression. Their inability to commit or prioritize you adequately teaches you to accept being undervalued, to tolerate being treated as option rather than priority, to remain in relationship where your needs remain chronically unmet. This learned tolerance for inadequate treatment becomes pattern you may carry into future relationships, settling for less than you deserve because relationship with avoidant conditioned you to accept minimal investment as normal or as best you can expect. Their limitation altered your standards and your expectations in ways that make you vulnerable to future relationships where you continue accepting inadequate treatment. This lasting impact damages your future regardless of their good intentions while failing to meet your legitimate needs. The good intentions particularly fail to protect you from the gaslighting dynamic their limitations create even without malicious intent. Their words express care and investment that their actions contradict. They say you matter, yet they consistently deprioritize you. They claim they want closeness, yet they consistently create distance. They express commitment, yet they consistently avoid deeper commitment. This gap between words and actions makes you question your own perceptions and your own reality. You doubt whether you are too demanding when you expect their actions to match their words. You wonder whether you are too sensitive when their contradictions create confusion and hurt. You question whether your needs are excessive when those needs remain unmet despite their expressed intentions to meet them. This erosion of your trust in your own perceptions damages your relationship with yourself in ways that extend far beyond this relationship. You lose confidence in your ability to assess situations accurately, to trust your instincts, to know what is real versus what is your distortion. Their limitation created this reality-distorting dynamic, regardless of their good intentions to care for you. The damage from their limitations also accumulates in ways that good intentions cannot prevent or reverse. Each withdrawal adds to your anxiety and your attachment wounds. Each instance of emotional unavailability adds to your loneliness and your grief. Each failure to prioritize you adds to your diminished self-worth. The accumulation creates compound damage, where the relationship becomes increasingly toxic to your well-being, even as the avoidance intentions remain consistently good. Their genuine care and their genuine wish not to hurt you do not stop the systematic accumulation of harm their patterns generate across time. You remain in relationship accepting those patterns. Understanding that good intentions cannot protect you from damage their limitations create allows you to make decisions based on actual impact rather than theoretical intentions. The relevant question is not whether they mean well. The relevant question is whether their patterns harm you, regardless of whether those patterns come from good intentions. You must assess relationship based on what it does to you, rather than based on what they wish it could be or what they intend it to be. Their good intentions, while real, are ultimately irrelevant to the question of whether you should continue exposing yourself to patterns that damage you. You can acknowledge they mean well while simultaneously acknowledging that their well-meaning does not prevent the ruin their limitations create. You can recognize their genuine care while refusing to continue being damaged by behaviors that occur despite and alongside that genuine care. The relationship destroys your sense of reality and your trust in yourself. The avoidant relationship creates specific conditions that systematically undermine your capacity to trust your own perceptions, to rely on your own judgment, to feel confident in your assessment of reality. This erosion of self-trust represents one of the most insidious forms of damage the relationship creates because it affects not just your current well-being, but your fundamental capacity to navigate all future relationships and life situations that require you to trust your perceptions and your judgments. The destruction of your sense of reality operates through multiple mechanisms that compound across time. You remain in relationship with avoidant whose patterns create constant contradictions between their words and their actions, whose behavior generates confusion that makes you doubt your own perceptions. The primary mechanism destroying your sense of reality involves the constant gap between what the avoidant says and what they do. They express care through words, yet demonstrate indifference through actions. They tell you that you matter, yet they consistently cancel plans. They say they want closeness, yet they consistently create distance. They claim commitment, yet they consistently avoid deeper commitment. This contradiction creates cognitive dissonance, where you cannot reconcile their expressed intentions with their demonstrated behavior. You face impossible choice: believe their words which suggest they care, or believe their actions which suggest they do not care adequately. Whichever you choose to believe, the other evidence contradicts your belief and makes you doubt whether you are perceiving accurately. The gaslighting quality intensifies when you raise concerns about the gap between their words and actions. The avoidant responds with explanations that position your perception as the problem, rather than acknowledging their contradictory behavior as the problem. You express hurt that they cancel plans again, and they explain you are being too sensitive or too demanding or failing to understand their legitimate need for flexibility. You communicate that their withdrawal creates anxiety, and they reframe your anxiety as your problem with their reasonable need for space, rather than acknowledging their pattern of withdrawal creates legitimate anxiety. You identify that their actions contradict their words, and they suggest you are not being understanding enough or are holding them to unreasonable standards. These responses train you to doubt your perceptions and to accept their framing of reality over your own direct observations. The erosion of self-trust also operates through the avoidance pattern of intermittent reinforcement that makes their behavior unpredictable in ways that prevent you from developing a reliable sense of what to expect. Sometimes they are available and engaged in ways that match their words about caring. Sometimes they are withdrawn and distant in ways that contradict those words. You cannot predict which version you will encounter, cannot develop pattern recognition that would allow you to anticipate their behavior, cannot trust your assessments because their behavior keeps contradicting whatever pattern you think you have identified. This unpredictability forces you into a constant state of doubt about your ability to read situations and people accurately. If you cannot predict or understand the behavior of person you are closest to, how can you trust your ability to assess anything accurately? The relationship also destroys your sense of reality by requiring you to accept explanations that contradict your direct experience. The avoidant explains their withdrawal as reasonable need for space, even though your experience is that space feels like abandonment. They characterize their emotional unavailability as healthy boundaries, even though your experience is that boundaries feel like walls preventing intimacy. They frame their inability to commit as maintaining healthy autonomy, even though your experience is that autonomy feels like rejection of partnership. You are repeatedly told that your direct experience is wrong or distorted, that you are misinterpreting their reasonable behavior, that your feelings are excessive responses to their appropriate actions. This consistent invalidation of your experience in favor of their explanations trains you to doubt your own internal experience and to defer to their framing of reality, even when that framing contradicts what you directly observe and feel. The destruction of self-trust extends to your decision-making capacity as you become increasingly unable to trust your own judgment about relationship. You think you should leave because the relationship harms you, yet you doubt this judgment because maybe you are being too demanding as they suggest. You feel the relationship is unhealthy, yet you question this feeling because maybe you are not being understanding enough of their struggles. You assess their patterns as inadequate, yet you second-guess this assessment because maybe your standards are unreasonable. This constant self-doubt paralyzes your capacity to make decisions based on your own judgment, leaving you trapped in relationship because you cannot trust your own assessment that relationship should end. The reality distortion also damages your capacity to identify red flags or problematic patterns in future relationships because you have learned to doubt your perceptions and to accept explanations that contradict your observations. You enter future relationship and notice concerning behavior, yet you doubt whether your concern is valid because avoidant relationship trained you to accept that your concerns are probably distortions or excessive reactions. You observe contradictions between words and actions, yet you question whether you are being too demanding rather than recognizing contradictions as legitimate warning signs. You feel that something is wrong, yet you override your feelings because you have learned not to trust your internal responses to relationship dynamics. The avoidant relationship damaged your radar for detecting problematic patterns by teaching you to doubt the very perceptions and instincts that would protect you. Understanding that relationship destroys your sense of reality and your trust in yourself allows you to recognize this damage as a serious form of harm that justifies leaving regardless of the avoidant's good intentions or valid wounds. The erosion of your capacity to trust yourself affects every area of your life: your relationships, your professional decisions, your ability to advocate for yourself, your capacity to recognize when you are being mistreated. This damage to your fundamental relationship with yourself and your own perceptions is too severe to continue accepting in service of maintaining relationship with person whose patterns create the reality distorting dynamics. You must protect your capacity to trust yourself, even if protecting it means leaving person who is not intentionally destroying your self-trust, but whose patterns systematically undermine your confidence in your own perceptions and judgments. You sacrifice yourself, trying to heal someone who isn't trying to heal themselves. You have invested enormous energy attempting to help the avoidant heal from their wounds, to create safety where they can lower their defenses, to provide understanding that might allow them to trust intimacy, to love them adequately enough that they can overcome their patterns. You research attachment theory to understand their psychology better. You modify your behavior to avoid triggering their defenses. You provide endless patience with their limitations, hoping your patience will eventually create enough security that they can begin changing. You sacrifice your needs to accommodate their capacity, hoping your sacrifice will demonstrate you are a safe person worth opening to. You pour yourself into creating conditions you believe would allow their healing. Yet despite all this investment, despite all your sacrifice, despite all your accommodation, the avoidant does not heal, and their patterns do not improve in sustained ways. The fundamental problem with your healing efforts is that you are attempting to heal someone from the outside who is not attempting to heal themselves from the inside. Healing attachment wounds requires the wounded person doing active internal work, engaging in therapy, examining their defensive patterns, developing insight about their wounds, practicing different ways of relating, tolerating discomfort that growth requires. Your love, your patience, your understanding, your sacrifice cannot substitute for this internal work the avoidant must do themselves. You cannot heal their attachment wounds through providing safe relationship, because their wounds prevent them from experiencing safety regardless of how safe you make the relationship. You cannot love them into wholeness because their defensive structure protects against receiving love in ways that would facilitate healing. The attempt to heal them while they do not attempt to heal themselves transforms you into codependent fixer whose identity becomes organized around trying to save someone who does not want to be saved or who lacks capacity to engage the healing process. You become consumed with analyzing their behavior to understand what they need, with modifying your approach to avoid triggering their defenses, with providing what you hope will create breakthrough that allows their healing. This consumption of your energy and identity with their healing process represents profound sacrifice of yourself. You abandon your own needs in service of their potential healing. You sacrifice your own well-being, attempting to create their well-being. You lose yourself in the project of trying to save them. The sacrifice becomes particularly damaging because it operates from false belief that your efforts can create change in someone who is not trying to change themselves. You maintain hope that if you just love them adequately enough, if you just remain patient long enough, if you just create safe enough environment, they will finally be able to heal and the relationship will transform into healthy partnership. Yet this hope is based on fantasy that external conditions can override internal defensive structure without the defended person actively working to change that structure. The avoidance defenses exist specifically to protect them from the vulnerability that healing would require. No amount of safety you create externally can override their internal need for defended protection unless they choose to engage in work of examining and modifying their defenses. Your sacrifice also enables the avoidant to avoid facing consequences that might motivate their own healing work. When you accommodate their patterns indefinitely, when you sacrifice your needs to manage their defensive comfort, when you remain despite their inadequacy, you eliminate motivation. They might otherwise have to address their patterns. Why would they engage difficult work of therapy and defensive examination when their patterns cost them nothing? When you continue providing relationship despite those patterns? When your accommodation means they can maintain defended comfort while retaining access to benefits you provide? Your well-intentioned sacrifice actually prevents their growth by making their patterns sustainable without change.